Good afternoon and welcome back to the afternoon session of the first annual, we trust, World Forum on Global Hunger. I would like to thank Executive Director Jeremy Everett, who guides the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty, Executive Director Beasley, distinguished panelist. My name is Todd Still. I serve as Dean here at Baylor's George W. Truett Theological Seminary. We are thrilled that you are here, looking forward to a productive afternoon of presentation, conversation. Many of us pray day after day, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Your presence here today is the beginning of the answer to that prayer. Thank you for your presence. Dr. Everett.
Well, I am glad to be with you this afternoon and glad to know that I received a doctorate already. I'm in a doctoral program, but I guess I can drop out. This is what a great day. What a great day, man. Well, my name is Jeremy Everett, and I do serve as the Executive Director of the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty. Dean Still, we are grateful to you and to Truett Seminary for hosting us today and for being our partner, being a partner with us in educating the next generation of leaders to go bend the world towards justice. So it is a pleasure to do this here and an honor to do it with you. We are grateful for a lot of things today. We are grateful for the World Food Program and the role that they play in ending hunger and making that an actual realistic goal for us as a people. But we're also grateful for all of our industry partners. As many of you know, and you've heard me say numerous times, that no one sector can end hunger by themselves. If we are going to actually end hunger and bend the world towards justice, we're going to have to do it with the nonprofit sector working closely alongside the government sector, the corporate sector, the faith community sector, you name it. God created us all for this particular time and this particular place to transform our world. And we're not going to do it by ourselves, and the good thing is we don't have to. We're able to do it by working together. We've had a number, our sponsoring organizations today have not only been sponsoring organizations for events like this, but they've been our innovation partners. And so first I want to thank McLane Global for their investment level partnership with us. The McLane family has been a philanthropic supporter of our university, making many of our programs available for decades. And they certainly have stepped up with us. I'm going to tell a little bit about our partnership that we've had with them over this past year. Hormel Foods is a new partner of ours. Jim and Tammy Snee, whose daughter is at Baylor, have stepped up in a major way and announced, we'll be announcing a significant partnership with them next week by bringing in the leading food security researcher in the U.S. To Baylor, all because of their generosity. But they believe in good big food, and so they believe in creating sustainable communities while also creating resources for families all across the U.S. and all across the world. Pepsico's Food for Good program is one of the first partners that we had when we were just the Texas Hunger Initiative, and there were just a few of us. And they are the social enterprise arm of PepsiCo, and we got joined at the hip early on because we knew that they knew more about logistics than we did. And so they've been our partner in addressing child hunger in Texas for over a decade, and we're grateful for their partnership today. Umoja Foods, Umoja Supply is a new company, and they exist to address domestic and global hunger. They have started a new company with some great business minds to be able to lead the effort in providing logistical support to get food for families. And then Ameriqual. Ameriqual is a company who is a partner with FEMA. And so we think when we see those disasters in places like Louisiana, and we wonder, how in the world are we going to get food to families in situations where there are no roads, where we have to take boats into areas that are surrounded by water and don't have electricity. And Ameriqual, that's what they do. They create food for families in that circumstance. Well, a few years ago, in 2019, after I had served on a congressional commission called the National Commission on Hunger, where we spent 10 commissioners and myself spent 2 years traveling around the country, visiting with individuals who were food insecure, meeting with organizations that were addressing food insecurity, and then ultimately making recommendations back to Congress and then Secretary Vilsack on how to end hunger in America. When I got home, one of the reflections that I had with our team is that what was working to address hunger in urban America wasn't translating to rural communities. Simply put, our children, when they would get out of school, they didn't have summer meal sites to be able to access. They didn't have nonprofit organizations that were providing extra services in their community. And many times the children themselves and their families lived too far away from the schools where they went, where they attended during the school year. Without buses running, when summer hit, hunger among our childhood population in rural America skyrocketed. Well, that was something that I observed serving on the commission, and I asked our field offices that are scattered around the state of Texas. And the way that we work in research, policy, and practice. And we do that because we believe you have to have proximity to the problem. As Brian Stevenson says, if you don't have proximity to the problem, chances are good that your solutions are always going to be wrong. And so we have field offices scattered throughout the state of Texas that are immersed doing what John Lewis calls incarnational organizing, living and dwelling among the people, organizing them to try to bend their communities towards justice. Well, I sat down with our field offices. I asked them if they'd seen the same thing, and they had. And so we knew that we needed to develop some kind of a solution to addressing child hunger in rural America. So we picked up the phone, and we called Denton McLane at McLane Global, and we described the circumstance that we were under. And then we picked up the phone, and we called USDA, and we described the circumstances that we were seeing, and all agreed that this was something that we could partner together to do something about. So in the summer of 2019, we had a small little partnership we called Meals to You, where we had 4,000 children in East and West Texas on a 10-week demonstration period, where we mailed them a week's worth of food in a box directly to their front porches. Then McLane's team sourced the food, boxed the food, shipped the food. Kathy Cry, who leads our research and administration work, and her team organized the school districts and got parents signed up to be a part of the program, and the program worked great. After a 10-week demonstration project, we served about 500,000 meals and snacks to children that would not have otherwise received a summer meal through USDA. Our plan, like we all had plans before 2020, was that we would then expand this program into New Mexico and Alaska. Well, then COVID hit. And shortly after COVID hit, we were hearing rumors that school districts were going to begin shutting down around the country. So USDA picked up the phone and they called me. I was in Denver at the time. And they said, is there any way that you can scale this program nationwide immediately? Because ultimately, we think schools are going to be shutting down and we don't know how we're going to get food to children who live in rural America. They basically gave us 24 hours. I called Kathy and our team and we all freaked out a little bit. And then I called Denton and I said, is this something that we can possibly do? And he said, absolutely. Now we recruited a couple of additional partners, Pepsico's Food for Good team and Chartwell's, the nation's largest school food provider, to come alongside us. But when we did, we were able to serve, during the pandemic, while schools were closed, almost 300,000 children 2 meals a day in our nation's most remote areas. We literally had, that's right, clap for him, that's right. We literally had children in Alaska receiving boxes of food via dog sled teams and helicopters. We had children in the bottom of the Grand Canyon in the Havasu tribal community receiving boxes of food via mule teams that were taking boxes of food down to them, and then UPS drivers and USPS drivers delivering food to kids from coast to coast. We served kids in 43 states plus Puerto Rico. And it was an amazing feat by our collective teams to be able to pull that off. But I didn't have to go negotiate with warlords. I didn't have to sit down with somebody that I considered a terrorist to be able to get. Now, we had to negotiate with some politicians, which are pretty close. But our safety was not on the line in terms of our lives being threatened for doing the work that we were doing. We didn't have to go build the roads and bridges into the communities where we were serving food. But that's the work of the World Food Program and the conditions that they experience on a day-to-day basis. It's not easy to go into Afghanistan right now to ensure that 18 million people have access to food in a country that has just been through the ringer. It's not easy to go into Yemen or the Sudan or Nigeria and to be able to negotiate with people that don't negotiate, people that don't see you as created in the image of the same God that you might see them created in. That's the work of the World Food Program. They are the United Nations' largest humanitarian agency, and it is tasked with ending global hunger. This year, the World Food Program won the Nobel Peace Prize, and the chairwoman, Berit Rice-Anderson of the Nobel Committee, said that the WFP deserved this prize for its efforts to combat hunger, for its contribution to bettering conditions for peace in afflicted areas, and for acting as a driving force in its effort to prevent the use of hunger as a weapon of war and conflict. Well, this afternoon, we have the privilege of hearing from the World Food Program's Executive Director, David Beasley, a person of deep faith and commitment to the cause of ending global hunger and changing the way that we see how we access food, because he believes that food is a fundamental right of all people. A fundamental right for all people. Imagine the implications of that for our food system. As Executive Director of the World Food Program, David Beasley continues his life's work bridging political, religious, and ethnic boundaries to champion economic development and education. At the WFP, Mr. Beasley is putting to use 4 decades of leadership and communication skills to mobilize more financial support and public awareness of the global fight to end hunger. As governor, before he was in this role, of the state of South Carolina from 1995 to 1999, he made the first public push for the removal of the Confederate battle flag from the state Capitol dome, a move that earned him the John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award. Mr. Beasley received his bachelor's degree from Clemson, his JD from University of South Carolina. He taught at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government, which we know is only second to the LBJ School, represented by our own Kate Whelan here, or Truett Seminary, of course, and the policy courses that they'll be taking with us, Dr. Howe. But he was first elected to public office when he was 21. And he's married to former Mary Wood Payne, and he is the father of 4 children. Well, 2 decades ago, I asked famed liberation theologian Father Gustavo Gutierrez, how does one have solidarity with the poor? I mentioned that to the group this morning. And he told me you must commit your life to their cause. David Beasley and his team at the World Food Program are doing just that. So please join me in welcoming David Beasley, Executive Director of the World Food Program.
Everett, thank you, Dean. Thank you. It's great to be here. And Van Hips, who's in the back, raised his hand. It was really way back when made the connection. And so it really is good to be in Texas. I got a phone call about taking this role. My first response was, no way I'm going to work for the UN. Number one, I don't even want a job. I'm in the private sector. Life's great. And there we were facing a president who was going to zero out the budget, 4 famines around the world, all types of problems surfacing. Who would sign up for that job? Funding's going to get cut, famines, problems arising. You know, as Donkey said on Shrek, pick me, but here we are. When I joined up 4.5 years ago, met with my friends in the U.S. Senate, Democrat and Republican leaders, who seem to be fighting over everything all the time, but are very united in the spirit of helping people around the world that need help. And they assured me that if you'll do this, that regardless of what President Trump will do, they'll back up the World Food Program because they understand the critical role that it plays in the stability of nations and the national security interests of the American people. And so when Trump did his budget, zeroing it out, and everybody was attacking Trump from the humanitarian side, and I said, and they were asking me, because I was such a prominent Republican figure to attack, I said, no, I know if I get in front of him, as I would get in front of any president or prime minister, once I lay the facts out in front, that leader will get it. And sure enough, we worked every angle from above and below the White House, the side doors, the windows, Ivanka, daughters, you know, all these types of angles. And the president and the Democrats and Republicans on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, as I call it, the Ameriqual on Pennsylvania Avenue, our funding from the United States went from $1.9 billion to $3.75 billion. And so if it were not for the World Food Program, you would have massive famines of biblical proportions unlike anything you've ever seen, destabilization of dozens of nations, and mass migration beyond anything you have ever seen. That's not rhetoric, that's not hyperbole. I can sit down and break down the countries and show you what we do, why we do it, how we do it, and the impact that it has. As I talk to especially some of my conservative friends in the Bundestag in Germany or the UK Parliament or even in the House and Senate here, as I lay down, if you don't do this, here's what's going to happen. As I was saying earlier, it's like having water lines in the ceiling busted. And the Democrats and the Republicans are fighting over where to put the buckets. Versus, it's a lot cheaper to go up in the ceiling and fix the water lines. Otherwise, you got to repair the floor, the carpet, the curtains, the tables, the chairs. That's the World Food Program. When I arrived at the World Food Program 4.5 years ago, I had some pretty simple questions to the United Nations. Number one, I didn't speak that language. They speak English, but I don't know what they're talking about half the time. They talk this UN lingo with all these acronyms, VAM rate, BAM rate, this rate, that rate. I'm like, what the heck does all this mean? I'm just an old country boy. Are people hurting? Are they starving? Are they suffering? Tell me what it is. And I would ask organizations and operations in countries, how long have you been here? Oh, proudly 40 years. I said, 40 years? Maybe it's not working. Maybe you ought to step back and reevaluate your approach. And so we began asking these simple questions because my goal is not to grow the World Food Program, even though we're growing, is to put the World Food Program out of business. Because we love our neighbor, we want our neighbor to be able to take care of themselves, have resilience and sustainability. So historically, the World Food Program was created out of the goodness of the heart of the American people from the surplus from our farmers, from Eisenhower and to Kennedy and forward. And so historically, we would just bring commodities into nations. But now we've transformed with different approaches. We still do that to certain degrees, but there are other types of ways of doing things. How do we stimulate the local economy? For example, we now put in $2 billion worth of cash directed to beneficiaries where there is commodities or marketplace, like in Lebanon, for example. If I pulled out of Lebanon or Syria or Jordan, you'd have a complete collapse. We're feeding millions of people in each place. And because we're putting in billions of dollars of cash, we keep the liquidity into the marketplace, which helps the millions of people that aren't on the beneficiary list of the World Food Program. And Our beneficiaries that go to the local store are buying local commodities grown by local farmers, which is helping stimulate the economy in other ways. Now, that's the simple version. So that's about $2 billion, and you can imagine the artificial intelligence, the blockchain technologies, the fingerprinting, biometrics that we do, and eye scanning. So we are a leader in a lot of these ways, and we want to make sure that your dollar gets to the right beneficiary and not to ISIS or Al-Qaeda or someone else. So these systems in place are very, very important. But we also now will come in with billions of dollars and not just bring commodities in from the United States, but we'll also buy ourselves in major market opportunities in, let's say, Africa to help stimulate the African agricultural market. Working with the private sector, helping them produce the quantity and quality of the grains, commodities that we need. Extremely important. Now, as to the beneficiaries, I have a pretty simple rule. I believe that every able-bodied beneficiary should be in a community improvement project if you are able-bodied. And so now we have millions of people rehabilitating land, planting trees, building roads and bridges. In the last 4 or 5 years, we have built over 7,500 bridges, 69,000 kilometers of roads, 59,000 kilometers of canals, dikes, holding ponds, reservoirs, 6 billion trees have been planted. No one's greening up earth more so than the poorest of the poor who are paying the price, arguably, for industrialization. So we believe that every beneficiary has a lot to give. And let me tell you, when you feed 115, 20 million people like we do every single day, week, month, throughout the year, we survey them, we talk to them. They don't want outside aid. They want aid that'll help them get off their feet. I haven't met one yet that said, oh, I love sitting around doing nothing. It's just people are people. They want to do. And African women, holy mackerel. Nothing is more focused and driven than African women. You give the money to the men, there ain't no telling what's going to happen. You give it to the women, they make sure every nickel gets to the child. And we're empowering women out there in ways beyond imagination. I can remember standing on a hill in Niger, standing with this particular woman. She said, Mr. Beasley, before we depended on you 100%. Now, she said, I bought 5 acres of land, and I'm now feeding not just my family, but also the village, and I'm going to buy 5 more acres of land, and we're going to be selling to the marketplace. She stood there with so much pride. And when we go in places like Niger or Mali or Burkina Faso and Chad, where you've got ISIS and Al-Qaeda, or Nigeria, Boko Haram, you see, if we're not there, these fragile environments, economically and climate-wise, and conflict, because most of ISIS came out of Syria into these areas. How do we know? Well, we are feeding millions of people. If I fed everybody in your neighborhood every day, I know what's going on in your neighborhood. I know when a new truck comes in. I know when a troublemaker comes in. And I can tell you where the trade routes are. We have them on drug trade, weapons trade, sex trafficking, slave trade. We know. And when we come into an area that's been degraded because of climate change, for example, like in Niger, where the Sahara, you can debate what's causing it to change, but you can't debate that it's changing. It is. It's beyond my understanding. You got the Earth going around 1,000 miles an hour, going around the sun 68,000 miles an hour. Then the planetary system moves from 350,000 miles an hour. How in the world we can sit here so calmly, I don't understand. I'm just an old country boy. But these people can't wait until there's a global solution. They got to survive today. And when we come in with a land rehabilitation program, harvesting water, and if we complement it with a school meals program, by the way, we're the world's largest provider of school meals, other than the governments itself. Let me tell you what happens. Migration drops off the chart. Teen pregnancy and marriage rate of 12-year-old and 13-year-olds drops off the chart. You quantify each one of those economically. And the recruitment by ISIS and Al-Qaeda drops off the chart. I've had more mothers tell me my daughter was starving to death, hadn't eaten in over a week or 2 weeks. My husband had no choice. He had to join ISIS to get food because they use food as a weapon of recruitment, starving people to get people to work with them. We see it every day. This is not pie in the sky. This is the reality that we face out there. In fact, the day that I got that famous phone call on the Nobel Peace Prize, that's just not a call you get often. It was quite a remarkable call. And what was really interesting, and not many people know this, but we had heard that the year before and the year before that we would get it. So our team was all excited and got all prepared, and we didn't get it. And I told my team, look, do not ever bring this up to me again. Stay focused on what we do. If it happens, it happens. And so that morning, remember the Norwegian ambassador? We were in the hotel in Niamey in Niger, and I'm going to grab a little quick breakfast about 6:30, and then we're heading out to the field where I got ISIS and Al-Qaeda on the north and the south side of where we were going because we were going to negotiate access. And the ambassador said, y'all gonna win the Nobel Peace Prize? I'm like, oh no, is that today? He said, yeah. I'm like, don't talk to me. Please don't talk to me. I don't want to hear about it. And I forgot about it. And we were out there in the field and negotiating access because it was really critical. Because if we don't, ISIS grows and Al-Qaeda grows and they destabilize and take over a nation. It's just, and then you have mass migration infiltrated into Europe. And so we're in intense negotiations sitting there, and this guy just busts into the room. And I'm like, immediately give that look like, what are you doing? This is critical. Nobel Peace Prize. And I'm like, well, yeah, okay, who won it? We did, you did, the World Food Program did. And I was like, holy moly. So my wife, I don't think I've ever told this publicly. So it's like 3 in the morning in South Carolina. My wife happened to be in South Carolina. And she had a dream the night before that I'd been caught in crossfire and gotten shot and all this kind of stuff, which is not unlikely where we go. And so she had this bad omen the night before, which I didn't know about. And so she's the first person I'm calling, and I'm in Niger, and the phone's ringing, and obviously, you know how it is if you're a parent to call phones ringing at 3 a.m. in the morning. It ain't good. I mean, it just is not going to be good news. And she could see it's me. She knew where I was, very worried about ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And there I am, and I go to say something, and I choke up because I'm so emotional about winning the Nobel Peace Prize. And she's like, she hears me trying to speak, and I can't speak, so she's thinking, oh my gosh, he's trying to say, I love you before I die, that kind of thing, Finally, I could get it out. And so anyway, a little bit of personal story. We received that award because food brings peace. Hunger brings conflict and destabilization and problems. They're tied together. We can end hunger by 2030. But it won't happen as long as we have man-made conflict. We were on the road to ending hunger. As I had mentioned earlier today, 200 years ago, there was 94% of the people on earth, 1.1 billion, in extreme poverty. Think about it. Think about 94% of the people. Today, less than 10%. So we have built systems, programs put in place to share more wealth than any time in world history. That's good news. The bad news is that we still have to reach that last 10%. Many people, and especially some of our young people, want to tear down the 90% to reach the 10. And we have got to work together not to do that, but reach that 10%. And as I talk with a lot of young people whose hearts mean so well, I'm saying, look, whoa, let's think about this. There's a reason there's a lot of these gray hairs around here that learned a lot what to do, what not to do. But we've got to reach that 10%, and we can. There's no reason we cannot end hunger by 2030. So let me give you some numbers. When I joined the World Food Program, the number of people marching to starvation, not chronically hungry, that's a different number, was 80 million people. Right before COVID, that number had spiked from 80 to 135 million people. Why would be your question. The simple answer is man-made conflict. And I say that in a gender way. Syria, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Yemen, let me keep going. 80% of our expenditures are in areas of conflict. 60% of the people, it costs more money to feed people in a war zone. You ever try to get somebody to drive a truck while bullets and IEDs and missiles are flying overhead? They're going to charge you a little more. It's a reality that we face. I'm moving trucks right now into the Idlib area in Aleppo area of Syria. I'm having to move trucks through Ethiopia, as you can imagine, in the Tigray region. Very complicated right now because of all the abuse and the hostilities between ethnic groups. Or as we're moving cargo in Afghanistan right now. You won't believe it, but the Afghan Taliban, I've sat down with them 2 weeks ago. I flew over, we've been meeting and talking. People, why are you meeting with ISIS? Or why are you meeting with the Taliban? Well, I can't just walk in your home and start moving your furniture around. You got to get permission, whoever controls the access. And if we reach the people, they're not then prone to the problems that can come. And so, in fact, the Taliban have assured us, and they've delivered on this so far. I'm not sitting here being pro-Taliban. We are independent, neutral, impartial as we operate, no matter who it's with. But I've got to move cargo through ISIS, through Al-Qaeda. I had at one time a friend, senator, said, you can't negotiate with Al-Shabaab. I said, I'll tell you what, Senator, I'll let you drive that next truck down there. And when those 3 Jeeps pull up with those M50s and about 14 AK-47s, as they get you out that truck and got that gun right to your head, and all they want is a bag of that weed, I think you might negotiate with them. I mean, that's what we deal with. We got systems in place to protect from diversion of aid. We sit down with the bad guys. I say the bad guys because it usually is guys. And explain to them what we're doing, why we're doing. And it's really quite remarkable. Even the worst of the worst are all still created in the image of God and respond to the goodness of helping innocent people. It's really a phenomena of the creative nature that God gave every human being who's made in his image around the earth. And we can't turn our backs on these people. Remember the story when Jesus says, when I was hungry, you didn't feed me. When I was thirsty, you didn't give me drink. And they said, well, when were you hungry? We didn't feed you. And he said, when you didn't do it to the least of these, you didn't do it to me. And every human being is created in the image of God. So when you don't feed that human being that image, you're denying the Almighty. And when you think that during COVID, there was a new billionaire created every 17 hours. Net worth increase per day of the world's billionaires was $5.4 billion per day. Jeff Bezos, $64 billion net worth increase in the height of COVID. I said, Jeff, I've got now 41 million people in IPC level 4 knocking on famine's door out of that 270 million marching to starvation, that literally at famine's door. I need $6 billion extra dollars to reach that 41 million. If I don't, we're going to have starvation, destabilization of nations, mass migration. It's going to cost trillions. Is it too much to ask for just 10% of your net worth increase? Is it too much to ask just for one day's worth of net worth increase of the world's global wealthiest? I am not opposed to capitalism. Anybody knows me knows that I did and fought hard, and Van can tell you what we did in South Carolina because we believe in empowering the private sector. Charity is important, but you will never solve poverty without the private sector being front and center. And the UN is really waking up to that now, because before it shunned the private sector, but now beginning to realize we'll never solve these problems without the private sector. And when COVID just decimated, created economic ripple effects and supply chain disruptions around the world, you think you've struggled in America? You hadn't struggled. You've been inconvenienced. You have a lockdown in Waco. You've got a pantry full of food for 2 weeks. You might not like what you're eating the second week, but you'll be okay. No, where we are, you have a lockdown, they eat hand to mouth every day. They don't have a pantry full of food. If we're not there with a safety net program, you will have death, starvation, protests, riots, etc. Europe neglected to address Syria, a nation of 21 million people, fell apart, destabilized, and a couple million migrated into Europe with a small infiltration by ISIS. From the Atlantic to the Red Sea, the Sahel region, all the way over across Ethiopia, Djibouti, Eritrea, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, their intent and purpose, what they want to do is destabilize 500 million people. Imagine destabilized with dozens of millions heading into Europe, infiltrated by ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram. And people, I had a reporter, France 24, are you trying to scare the European people? Excuse my French, but I said, hell yeah, I am trying to wake you up to the reality that you are facing. This is not rhetoric. That's their goal. And food is the most powerful weapon of diffusing that explosive situation. The world produces 4.2 billion metric tons of food per year. 1/3 of it's wasted. 1/3 in the developing nations at the dinner table. You and me wasting food at the dinner table. 1/3 in the developing nations from the farm to the market because they don't have the tools, the storage facilities, etc. The value of that is almost $1 trillion that would feed 2 billion people. We can do something about that. Starts at your dinner table. Barbara Bush said in the campaign when her husband was running for re-election, it's not so much as what happens at the White House as much as what happens at your house. What are you doing to make a difference? Climate extremes, we're looking at 1.2 billion people being displaced by 2050. 1.2 billion. We had 30 million displaced last year alone because of climate extremes, droughts, floods, more hurricanes, cyclones. We're on the front lines dealing with this every single day. We pre-position food now all over the world, doing the things that we need to do. We'll be heading down to Haiti in a couple of days and Venezuela, hopefully resolve some issues there as we pre-position food throughout, as well as, you see, we're not just the food guys. We actually are the supply chain mechanism for the humanitarian sphere in the United Nations. When COVID hit, we moved all the equipment around the world, ventilation, testing equipment, you name it, because the airline industry shut down. Well, when people are running to hide from COVID in their rooms, if I expose all of you to COVID, maybe one of you might die, maybe two. You don't eat for 3 weeks, and none of you are going to make it. 2.5 million people died last year from COVID, 9 million died from starvation. This year, the number could be double that. Every 4 seconds, 3 to 4 seconds, somebody's dying from hunger. We can solve that with $400 trillion worth of wealth and the expertise in this room and the support, the commitment, the excellence in this room. There's no reason we can't solve hunger around the world. So I need to stop. I know, get into some questions, but it's great to be with you. Thank you for all you're doing. Hope I stepped on some toes and also inspired you a little bit. Thank you very much. God bless.
Wow. How about it? Another round of applause. That was incredible. it's fitting that we chose to do this in the seminary, because that was quite a sermon, wasn't it? That was wonderful. Well, how many people do you know are negotiating between ISIS and Al Qaeda to get food to people? And isn't it fitting that that's when he received the Nobel Peace Prize? Isn't that incredible? That is amazing. Well, that was incredible. Those incredible words, and certainly,
I just got a message from the Houthis.
Oh.
While I'm sitting here about a little scenario. It's 24 hours a day, but the
Man.
Houthis are in Yemen. And so anyway, I can't tell you who this guy is, but he's helping us move the progress forward. But he's, anyway, reaching out. It's just technology.
Yeah, that's who do you know that gets text from the Houthis from in the middle of a session? Well, I want to do two questions, and then but here's what I want us to do. So this is your chance to ask a question of somebody who has a global perspective like few people you will ever meet in your life. So we have one microphone. I know the Reverend Aaron Zimmerman. I told him he could have the first question because we ran out of time in the first session, and so he's gonna ask the first question. So Aaron, I'm gonna ask one question, and then I'm gonna turn it to you. But you said you quoted Barbara Bush. So it's not about what happens in the White House; it's what happens in our house. What are one or two things that people here can do to work alongside the World Food Program to ensure that we're ending hunger in our lifetime?
I think of Mother Teresa when one of these billionaires came up to her and she said, "Go home and love your wife." You know, it was like so simple. First and foremost, the power of prayer is real. I absolutely believe it's the most powerful weapon within the context of love, which is the most powerful weapon on earth. Love is defined by the Almighty. Second is when you love your neighbor, you know, your neighbor, yes, that's Zimbabwe, that's Haiti, but it's also here in Waco. You'd be quite surprised the impact that a poor person can have on your life and how you can impact somebody that's struggling here. Now, you can go online with www.wfp.org. You can donate. That's great. We'd love to have your money. But actually, I want particularly those of you in the private sector engaged to truly, we need your experience and expertise and leadership out there in the communities, whether it's here or abroad. Now, we talked about that a little bit earlier. Like, we're putting together top CEOs around the world to come into countries. I don't want your money. I want your engagement to help solve problems, bring in your expertise, reforming economies and way you do things. But also empower your employees, inspire your employees locally to do things, even be willing to hire a few people you don't need to hire to help them, you know, just get their feet back on the ground. You'd be surprised because, as Billy Graham said, the government's getting big because people don't care like they used to in the church community. And so therefore, because whether you're a liberal or conservative, I do believe, you know, as my friends fight it out in the Senate and the House, and they get mad at each other, and I'm like, okay, you might disagree that Republicans may say, well, I believe that's better solved at the local level, not by more government. And the Democrats may say, well, we believe that government ought to do it because you're not doing it in the private sector. And it's just like, okay, you fight it out, but you still love each other unconditionally. We have a difference of policy. But then won't you join hands because you're saying you want to help the poor. Now, won't you just go join hands in your individual capacity in your local communities, go help the poor while the government does or does not do its thing according to your policies? And we don't need to be fighting all the time. I mean, people that are going to Washington every time, you know, when Jesus put together his group of men and women, he didn't go to Harvard and Yale. He found some ordinary men and women in the neighborhood and changed the entire world. It really isn't complicated. It really isn't. So anyway, Everett, I know you got the
Aaron,
theologian over here.
That's right. So, and I want you to speak to, I do want you to speak to after Aaron. No, Aaron, you come on up. I want you to speak to your encounter with a Jewish scholar at the Vatican. So I want you to tell everybody about what you learned about equality at that point. Aaron has a question that really fits in with what you just said. So Aaron, go ahead.
Thank
Aaron,
you.
introduce yourself to everybody.
Yeah, I'm Aaron. I'm the rector of St. Albans Episcopal Church here in Waco, Texas. Officially still on sabbatical, so keep your pastoral problems to yourself, Jeremy. But thank you for letting me ask this question. One of the things that really struck me listening to you speak this morning was the fact that global poverty is a global issue, and hunger is something that can really be addressed only through multinational cooperation by an organization like the UN and heads of state and those offices and administrations working together to address these issues because of the conflict and because of the supply chain, all that. So if all these nations have to come together to do it, and we are a country because of the real estate we own after World War II and the size of our economy and the size of our military, we have to be a big player. And yet there's a really strong sentiment of America first, and that NATO is the worst and the UN is a problem, and kind of that sort of rhetoric that it waxes and wanes, but it seems to be sort of strong these days. And so if the sure way not to get reelected is to say America plus other countries, and some of our funding, your taxes have to go to dealing with these crises, how do you then motivate the political movement to address these issues and to make sure we maintain our place at the table for global security, for the global economy, and to combat hunger and poverty? So who is doing that work? How do you do that work? What do you think about that from where you sit?
It's 2:48. I don't know if I can finish that one by 4 o'clock, but I'll try. Too many people get caught up into the tweets and the social media, which most of us junk and propaganda. You need to ignore a lot of the stuff on here and stay focused on doing what you need to do. Did you see what they said about you? And I'm like, I don't care. Here's what we're doing, here's where we're going. Let's stay focused on what we need to do. The United States is still looked upon literally by every nation on the planet as a leader. In spite of some of the junk lately, and this ridiculous what we're bickering about nowadays. It really is. It's silly. We need to forgive each other. We need to work with them, love each other, respectfully disagree. It's what made this nation so great. And I have a lot of leaders around the world that are worried and concerned, but they still think America, is going to be fine. And I say it will be fine. American people are good people. But staying focused and prioritizing, this is my biggest concern right now. We were talking about this earlier with the media. You turn on the media now, you get so much junk. In the Trump years, 90% of the coverage was Trump. I don't care if you love him or hate him. It was that, and then it was Brexit. COVID. And you've got millions of people dying around the world from conflict, from climate change, to this and that. And I know the American people, if they know it's happening, they will push their political leadership, go solve that, go do this. But most of the people don't know now because, I bet you know what Harry and Meghan were doing last week. And I like Harry. He's a good guy. But even Harry himself would say, this is ridiculous. I have many leaders say, we don't even know about this. We don't even hear about this. And when I go to the halls of Congress, it's just amazing what they don't know. And it's a problem. We're so much more connected, but so much more disconnected because there's so much noise out there. And I just think we've got to stay focused, continue to do what we do. We got a story to sell, and we got a song that needs to be sung. And so I know this isn't an easy solution, but there are people like myself and others that are out there that are driven, that are moving the message, and we're moving the dial. I've seen this already in the United Nations. When I first arrived and I was saying things, and I got rebuked by some friends that you shouldn't be saying that. And I'm like, no, fire me. I'm not backing down. This is what we're going to do. And so we've been changing the dialogue globally around the world in the United Nations, and like with the humanitarian, the development nexus versus the old systems and silos. It was either humanitarian or it was development. Well, that doesn't work anymore. It's old systems. The paradigm is shifted. And how do we merge the two where strategic, change the dialogue? And that's not easy because all these systems are built upon these parameters of humanitarian development. Well, that doesn't fit in that. Well, you're not going to solve it doing it the way you've been doing it for 40 years. Hello? I mean, that country's still poor. Look at Haiti. Yeah. Let me just go through some African countries. We need to put Marshall plans in place for many countries because you got so much corruption. That's the number one problem in the world is corruption in government. In Haiti, and I can just go through some African countries. And we need to put together a Marshall Plan, but the West needs to, the major international donors need to come together on that. And I've been pretty clear with leaders in private that the top leaders need to talk about this and put together teams that we will all come together in this country, this country, this country, and you're not getting international aid except we're going to do it this way. Ending corruption, transparency will be on the table, et cetera. And we can truly, Africa can feed the world. Africa has got more natural resources. Holy mackerel, it's unbelievable. But it's all the bickering and the fighting, and it's heartbreaking. And when I see, I don't want to get too deep here, but diplomats that just, I've been pretty tough on some leaders lately. I said, with all the problems, it's like that little game, whack-a-mole. You're running around, you pop that one and that one pops. You pop, so you just run around kind of popping it on the head, and you're not slowing down and solving them. I said, why don't you slow down and let's just solve Yemen. All the leaders, let's come together and do what's necessary to end the conflict because it is solvable. But it ain't going to be solved given 15 minutes a day. We solve that one, that frees up billions of dollars to go into areas that really need help. Okay, we solved that one. Then we go solve Syria. It's solvable, but nobody's giving it the time because the media wants to ask 90% of their questions on silly things. We got icebergs out in front of the Titanic, and everybody wants to talk about the broken tea glass in the ballroom. Not that that's not important. We'll clean that up, but I think we need to. Hey, we got some icebergs out there. Yeah, but you see what Putin did with that teacup back in 1975? I'm like, yeah, but you got an iceberg there. Yeah, but you see that piece of tile that so-and-so in Haiti broke in 1984? Yeah, but you got an iceberg out there. Yeah, you see what Maduro did 7 years ago and you got a broken wine glass in the bar? But you got an iceberg out there. The world's very fragile right now. When you got 270 million people on the brink of starvation, 41 million in 43 nations that could destabilize. Holy moly, it is very fragile. And I like to think we're probably the number one thing keeping it together, Van, as we've talked about many, many times. But we can't keep holding it on like this. The leaders have got to get focused. And it's hard to today with the ADD. I mean, we're all dysfunctional now with this stuff, as I'm getting texts from my buddy Hootie. Right?
Well, on that note, I want to expound on that. Thank you, Aaron. And if anybody has a question, we'll wrap this session up about 3:15, so we don't have a lot of time. And so if you're wondering whether or not you should ask one, go ahead and make your way up. On that note, so an example I feel like for what Reverend Zimmerman was talking about, you take the job. Trump has zeroed out the World Food Program. Talk people through the process that you went through from taking a zeroed out budget to tripling the investment of the United States, because that speaks to your desire to cultivate trust and build relationships, but it's a very tangible thing that was transformative. It's the most our nation has ever invested in the World Food Program, and it happened when we were going to have a zeroed out budget for you. So what process did you go through to be able to convince the president otherwise?
Well, if I were in the private sector, I'd be fired because, my goal was to put the World Food Program out of business, and we were totally going the wrong direction, and we get a Nobel Peace Prize. It's kind of strange, isn't it? Well, it wasn't that easy, and it wasn't that complicated, but it required just a lot of work. Being strategic, managing your time effectively, using social media, using all the available tools, and all the friends that haven't been a United States governor, and all the friends that I had in the Senate and the House from both parties, taking advantage of all those relationships. And, you don't hardly get to the presidency because the way the primary process works, South Carolina is sort of cleans things up. You remember Bush got in trouble and we threw a few out the window and Bush went on. and many other stories, South Carolina, yada, yada, yada. And
He is not suggesting that the voting system was corrupt there. But yeah.
No, not at all. Not at all. And so take advantage of every opportunity, because I knew that if Trump could get the information, which required a lot of work, and then you had General Mattis and all of his chief of staff and his head of McMaster, head of national security, as well as defense, and they all had seen firsthand the power of soft aid, humanitarian aid, and so they and all the generals were united. And then we had enough members of the House and the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, that had seen the power of this aid. And then I would strategically go, and this has been one of the problems, as I mentioned earlier, the United Nations just doesn't speak a common sense language that average people understand, including congressmen. And so I started speaking a simple language, speaking to the Senate, speaking to the House, speaking to the committees and the different countries around the world, and they became awakened to the reality that we're facing. So I'd go to, Syria in the middle of the war. I'd go into Yemen and stand there and talk, and they would see that, and they were like, gosh, we need to hear from Beasley. He just went to Yemen. He just went to Venezuela and met with Maduro. We need to hear from him. Well, he just went. So I go meet with the bad guys in the bad places and look for those windows to open up some good, and they want to hear about it. And so you build that trust and respect, and they know I don't have an agenda, and I'm not out promoting myself. We've won the Nobel, so I don't need to, jump up and down like that anymore. And so there's a lot of respect created, and it's good. And so we took advantage of that to parlay these simple messages in explaining. And I would have liberal members of parliaments and Daniel would call me and say, I need you to come speak to our committee, but I need you to speak to the conservatives because they don't want to send aid down to, Chad when they got bridge needs and road problems and health care funding needs and school in their own area of Bavaria or Wisconsin. It doesn't matter. It's pretty much the same worldwide. And so I would go and speak on the radio and the TV in these countries. And you can imagine, it's 7 days a week. I think I've had headquarters is in Italy. I think my wife and I have had 6 weekends in 4 years together in Italy doing something. When I arrived, we were raising $15 million a day, and I'm raising now over $1 million an hour. So I'm strategic with every minute of my time, where I go, how I go, and where I sit on the plane, how fast can I get off, and how many meetings can I do, and all these things are relative when you're having to raise. And I sleep on a plane at least 2 nights a week, and I expect to drop dead soon, but it's okay.
Well, before you do that, could we hire you for a development job here at Baylor? Million. That's boy, do I have a project for you. Well, Dr. Whelan, I think you've got a question for us. Or Reagan? All right. Reagan, introduce yourself.
Okay. I'm just going to do this. Okay. My name's Reagan Van Kootren, and I work with the Abilene Big Country Hunger Coalition. And you mentioned earlier that you believe that the private sector should be leading the charge in humanitarian issues. And what I have seen through my life is largely the big players in the private sector leading the charge in greenhouse gas emissions and wage stagnation and those kinds of issues. So I just wonder what strategies you have other than like appealing to people's better natures, because that doesn't seem to have been working thus far.
So Reagan was asking, since it doesn't seem like appealing to the better nature of people is working very well, and certainly we feel like we've seen some of that in our work addressing hunger and poverty in Texas. So what are some other ways? And then also she was asking, when you think about some of these big, large players, sometimes they don't provide a seat at the table for the everyday citizen or the farmer that you're working with. So what are some of the ways that you can, that y'all address?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. Number one, and I actually talked about this earlier today, when COVID was just rippling around the world, and Tony Blair called me. And Tony, I think most of you know who Tony Blair is. Some of the young people might not, but you know, the Prime Minister of Great Britain. And so Tony called and said, David, you travel around the world, see more poverty, war, conflict than anybody I know. What do you see out there with COVID? And I said, Tony, I'm very, very worried that leaders are sticking their head in the sand and making decisions about COVID in a vacuum. And we can't do that. We have to work the health pandemic with a hunger pandemic. Otherwise, the cure will be worse than the disease. And we talked about that at some length, why, where, and what we were seeing. And he said, you've got to go talk to the leaders in the world at the United Nations Security Council. So I did. A couple weeks later, I went and spoke, laid this out, that you will have famines upon biblical proportions, and went through some of the numbers, created a sort of a firestorm, and the leaders responded in remarkable ways. So they did listen. And the government stepped up. We averted mass famine, mass migration, mass destabilization last year when the numbers were really right in our face. So the world responded, but we thought COVID would be over by 2021 and the economies would be turning back in the right direction, because when the United States sneezes, the rest of the developing world catches a cold. It really is that simple. And so the monies that we had available for 2020 were spent. And the monies that are now not available for 2021, 2022, the needs have doubled from 135 to 270. So the government's stretched with $27 trillion worth of economic stimulus packages, safety net programs, and things that we did to keep the ship from sinking, but COVID recycled. And now this is where the billionaires need to step up on a one-time basis to help complement what we're doing, while people in general, it's not that they're not responding. I don't think they're hearing it. A few might be and ignored it, but I believe that the American people will respond when they know about it. Just getting them to know about it's not easy when, I mean, you know what it is. You go home, this thing's blaring in your ear all day long with 45,000 million different ways to talk to you about what? And how do you filter out what's relevant? And, you know, this is your generation. I think if we're not careful, and it's your generation's got to fix this, this will bring an end to democracy in 50 years. If your generation doesn't figure out how to mature how to listen to it, differentiate the junk, the propaganda, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, how do you do that with free speech? It's not going to be easy. I'm not smart enough to figure it out, but I do believe the young people, you guys are, and y'all got really good hearts. And I really think you're less divisive in some ways. You got some things to learn, but I think together we'll get there. So
That's a good word. Matthew.
Thank you, Governor Beasley, for your remarks, your wisdom. My name is Matthew Well, and I teach here at Baylor. I'm a theologian, and I'm teaching a class on hunger now. And my students and I recently read the report on hunger and food insecurity that the World Food Program and many anti-hunger agencies associated with the United Nations released about a month or so ago. And something that really struck us in our discussions about the report was the centrality, the underlying pervasive centrality of poverty and inequality as drivers of hunger and food insecurity in our world. And I would like to hear you speak a little bit more about how you see World Food Program and other agencies and institutions addressing those sort of underlying issues, in addition to, obviously, you've spoken a lot about conflict and climate change and variability. So yeah, I'm interested in the question of poverty and inequality and how best to address that as a driver of hunger. Thank you.
Well, and we do a lot of little things in this area, big things, little things, and you know, it's what I had planned to focus on this year was going to be economic empowerment in the food sector. But COVID came, and it's just been all hands on deck. I had planned to spend this year, next year, literally driving the private sector in these countries. And I've just been all hands on deck trying to keep the ship from sinking, you know, putting fingers in the dam, the dike, and it's just been tough. One of the things in terms of equality, like in women's empowerment in a lot of the countries, and by the way, I've hired actually 2,750 more women in my organization in the last 4 years. And it's been remarkable. What we have with women's empowerment, and particularly in cultures where women are oppressed in so many ways, and when we come in with school meals programs, we won't do it unless little girls are there and little boys, and what that means is incredible. But letting women handle the money, generally in some of the African countries, if I give it to the men, it may or not get to the children. When you give it to the mother, those maternal instincts, it will get to the children. And what we do with women's empowerment in programs, and I can go from country to country, we've got about 10 million women just in empowerment programs, food for asset type programs where we give money and they do this types of things. And these are in tough countries, very, very, very poor countries, as you can imagine. There's a lot of things we do in education and technical training from country to country, depending upon which country and how we do that. But the issue of poverty, which, I mean, it's a heck of an issue. And the things that need to be in place, and this is where I say the United Nations is not the answer to that, and charity is not the answer to that. It's systems. And first it starts with minimizing corruption, because the stealing that goes on. And this is the thing that I think the United States, and especially international Western donors, have got to be more outspoken about this. Because at Treasury Department, they know where the money's going. And I think we don't need to be silent about it. I think we need to expose these leaders and do something about it. And I think we piecemeal too much. This is my problem when I talk with a lot of the leaders in Europe especially. You'll go into a country, in Germany you'll have a program right here. The U.S. will have a program right in the same country. The U.S. will have a program here and a program here. And those two programs don't talk to each other. And the Germans' programs don't talk to the U.S. programs. And the Canadians' program, and the U.K.'s program, and the EU's program. And I'm like, why don't we come together, be comprehensive and strategic, and not be played sort of a Marshall Plan approach, and you'll see things happen. We don't scale up. We piecemeal, and there'll be a nice little brochure about it to taxpayers. And it's like, but it was that big. You never did anything with it. I'm not sure I was really getting to the answer directly, but there are a lot of simple things to me coming from the outside, and I know I probably shouldn't say some of these things, but I don't need this job. Fire me. I'm okay with it, I'm going to do what I believe is right. I'm an old NASCAR boy. And, in Darlington Racetrack, there are 4 turns on your average oval track. I'm in my 4th turn, and I don't plan to coast across the victory line. I'm going to be guns a-blazing. I don't plan to back down. If they want to fire me for saying what I believe, fire me. Because there are too many people suffering as a result of this lukewarm, pacifist mindset. People are struggling out there. And when there's $400 trillion worth of wealth out there, it shouldn't be happening. We got to do better. We've got to incentivize, and it's not just more taxes, it's incentivizing the private sector to do more. And one of the things I'm talking with CEOs about going into Africa, I said, look, I know you've got my background's law, banking, etc. I know you've got a return on investment for your shareholders' meetings, expectations on Wall Street. I get that. But there's an incredible new social responsibility mindset permeating the corporate world around the world. And that's not just being more socially responsible by charity. What if you come into a country, tell your stockholders, you're going to be a little bit less efficient. It's going to take you a little bit longer, but you're going to come and bring in systems and stabilize the nation. Versus if you come in with the Western model, you got to have it just like this. That's not going to happen in Africa. Now, we're not asking you to go in and lose your shirt. We're just saying be a little more strategic. Don't displace all the workers with modern mechanization. Integrate them in. Be a little bit less efficient, a little bit less profitable. And otherwise, you'll have, I've seen it. You come in and displace the workers, and about 3 years later, you shut them down because you've got protests and riots and these types of things in the political leaders. There's ways to do it. And so I'm talking to the leaders about thinking outside the box. And so we're going to hit the ground running, talking, looking. And because I find when a leader, just like I'll get a conservative congressman or senator that doesn't support this type of international aid, and when I get them on the ground and they see what we're doing, they're like, wow, that's amazing what you're doing. They come back and they're diehards, you know. Anyway.
That's a good word. And it's why we need industry at the table alongside government, nonprofit sector, and our faith communities. We've got time for one more question. So why don't you go ahead and come up. If you don't mind taking off your mask and tell us who you are and then you can ask your question.
So my name is Kayla Chadwick, and I am a MDiv student in the Ecology, Theology, and Food Justice program. And my question for you today is, you mentioned the ecological crisis and the migrants that will be coming by the year 2050, and the mass amount of those that will be coming because of coming as climate refugees. My question for you today is, what is your program doing to minimize their impact on the ecological crisis?
Yeah, I think our organization has more impact on greening up the earth than I know of any organization on earth. We have planted with our beneficiaries, I can't remember if I said this a little bit earlier or not, but we've planted with our beneficiaries about 6-7 billion trees just in the last many years. We rehabilitated 3.5 million acres of land that was degraded land, not usable, like in the Sahel region, Sahara, that's now growing fodder for the animals, greening up, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're doing the things to harvest the water, to capture, to rehabilitate land that is now being arable, that is now being usable. Our projections, I don't know, let's say I'm half wrong, but the projections based upon what we're seeing in patterns in terms of, because we can break down and show you, like somebody said, well, you had the same amount of rainfall in these years. I don't know if that's right, but last year, where's the climate change? Well, we had more droughts in the summertime, and we had more rain in this time, so we had more flash floods here and more droughts here. Ended up being the same on average, but it's changing out there. We see it, we experience it, we know what's going on. We're looking at 1.2 billion people being displaced by 2050 due to climate extremes, climate shocks. So that's a big number. So how many think are coming from Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador? What is Europe going to be facing? If you destabilize the European economy, I can tell you which nation is going to pay the biggest price, U.S. economy. And then if you have massive destabilization in the Sahel region, let's say from the Atlantic to the Red Sea, you got infiltration by ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram, and they're not coming to Europe to look for jobs. They're coming to do other things. So we have got to be on top of this. Doing what's right has so many good benefits. If you're not going to do it out of the goodness of your heart, you better do it out of your national security interest, because you're going to pay for it one way or the other. But the key is not just throwing aid out there. It's strategic aid. That is what is key. And that should be a good debate by people of different walks of life in the halls of Congress, if they can get past what, Harry and Meghan are doing on TV or something like that.
Well, what a wonderful afternoon. And we're not done yet. We're going to take about a 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back with a panel of experts led by Dr. Jenny Howe. We've got a wonderful group of panelists, and we'll have some more time for Q&A with our experts. But folks, David Beasley and the World Food Program team, can you let him hear how grateful you are for coming to Waco?
Everett, thank you. I'm not the expert. These are the experts.
Well, that was phenomenal. I'm thinking that we need to get him to talk to our football players before they run out on field tomorrow, because I was pretty charged after that speech. But what a wonderful experience. So you have 5 minutes to use the restroom, get a sip of water, and then come on back in. Thank you.